Rich Piana s'est effondré avec de la poudre à côté. Je fais des stéroïdes depuis, je dirais environ 28 ans. Felicia Lee Sexton avait une dépendance à la cocaïne crack. Je sniffais de la cocaïne régulièrement. Et Neil Curry a fait une overdose de méthamphétamine et de cocaïne à 34 ans. Ils ont construit des corps que les fans adoraient, des bases de fans qui les finançaient, et des dépendances qui ont mis fin à leur vie. Ce sont des culturistes professionnels qui sont devenus des toxicomanes. Et le numéro 1, c'est Rich lui-même, Rich Piana. Le mec ne cachait pas sa dépendance. Il en a fait du contenu. Il a commencé à utiliser des stéroïdes à peu près au moment où la plupart des enfants commencent l'université et n'a jamais arrêté pendant plus de 27 ans. Le mec était ouvert à ce sujet. Il a dit à son audience qu'il était accroché, mec. Carrément accroché à la trénalon, l'hormone de croissance, l'insuline, tout l'arc-en-ciel. Il a construit la nutrition 5% sur cette image exacte. Les fioles, les tatouages, les bras géants de 23 pouces qui semblaient avoir été cousus par erreur. La discussion sur les stéroïdes était toute sa marque. Je fais des stéroïdes depuis, je dirais environ 28 ans. Mais c'est là que l'histoire s'inverse. Sa petite amie Chanel Johnson a admis plus tard qu'il avait des antécédents de problèmes avec les opioïdes avant tout le drame des stéroïdes. Le truc récréatif, le genre dont personne ne parle à la salle de sport. Donc, quand le 7 août 2017 est arrivé et que le PDG de 5% s'est effondré dans sa maison de Clearwater, en Floride, en se faisant couper les cheveux, la chronologie a commencé à sembler vraiment suspecte. Les ambulanciers sont arrivés à la maison et ont trouvé une poudre blanche, une paille et une carte de crédit sur les lieux. Ils l'ont frappé avec de l'analoxone. Pour les gens qui regardent à la maison, c'est le médicament que les médecins utilisent pour inverser les overdoses d'opioïdes. Chanel a dit que c'était juste de la caféine, provenant d'un pré-entraînement. Soyez vraiment sérieux maintenant. Tu ne sniffes pas du pré-entraînement sur une carte de crédit avant une coupe. L'icône du culturisme a été placée dans un coma artificiel. Il n'a jamais rouvert les yeux. Il est décédé le 25 août 2017 à l'âge de 46 ans. L'autopsie était dingue. Son cœur et son foie faisaient tous deux fois la taille des organes d'un humain normal, et le médecin examinateur a trouvé plus de 20 flacons de testostérone dans la maison. La cause officielle du décès inconnue. Avec une note secondaire, l'implication de drogue ne pouvait pas être exclue. Il a été le premier mec à monétiser la vérité sur l'utilisation de stéroïdes sur YouTube. Il a aussi été l'exemple type de ce qui se passe quand j'étais accroché, mec, cesse d'être un son préenregistré et devient un certificat de décès. En parlant des culturistes qui ont transformé leur corps en laboratoire de chimie, ce gars suivant avait des jambes tellement massives que l'industrie entière le craignait jusqu'à ce qu'il se tourne vers quelque chose bien plus sombre que le jus. Paul Deo Quadzilla n'a pas glissé dans la dépendance du jour au lendemain. La glissade a commencé après l'effondrement de sa carrière. Le natif de Malden, Massachusetts, était déjà une légende au début des années 90. Il l'appelait Quadzilla parce que ses quadriceps ressemblaient à deux hommes adultes entassés dans un seul short de pose. Il a remporté le titre général des juniors NPC 1991 et s'est classé 3e au national, devançant un mec à l'époque inconnu nommé Ronnie Coleman. Ouais, ce Ronnie Coleman. Il a viré pro en 1994 à 255 livres, mesurant 5'10". Il a participé à Mr Olympia, frappé le circuit du Grand Prix et ressemblait à un futur prétendant remarquable. Puis tout s'est effondré. Sa femme l'a quitté. Il a déménagé de la Californie à Boston où il s'entraînait chez Gold's Gym. La dépression l'a frappé. Les arrestations ont commencé à s'accumuler. Il y avait un incident d'arme à feu, une accusation de possession de percodane et du temps de prison qui a effacé ce qui restait de sa réputation. C'est à ce moment-là que l'héroïne a montré. La légende était tellement dedans qu'une histoire en circulation disait qu'il avait volé une femme âgée pour de l'oxycontine. Le même mec qui avait l'habitude de se muscler sur scène devant des milliers de personnes braquer les grands-mères pour des pilules. Le monde du culturisme dont il venait était un souvenir lointain. Le 2 juin 2005, son propre père a marché dans la maison à Medford, Massachusetts, et l'a trouvé mort. Overdose d'héroïne. Il avait 37 ans. Le décès a été jugé accidentel, mais les rues et les forums avaient d'autres théories. Un ami à lui est décédé le jour même, et les gens ont commencé à chuchoter à propos d'un mauvais lot d'héroïne qui circulait. Prada piqué, jeu trouble, qui sait? Greg Valentino, le même Greg Valentino au biceps qui explose, a fait une séance entière sur RX Muscle en parcourant la chronologie, la spirale de santé mentale, les drogues, la douleur familiale. Quadzilla avait tout. La carte pro, les jambes qui ont battu Ronnie à un moment donné. La base de fans. Il est mort seul dans une ville à laquelle il est revenu parce que nulle part ailleurs ne le voulait. C'est ainsi que l'histoire de Quadzilla s'est terminée. Alors que la spirale de Paul était le premier grand appel du sport du culturisme, le même modèle était sur le point de se répéter de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique avec un concurrent Mr Olympia dont les parents ont pointé du doigt directement sur le sport lui-même. Neil Curry. L'utilisation de drogue du pro britannique est venue emballer avec exactement la chose que le monde du culturisme refuse d'appeler addictive, les stéroïdes. Selon ses propres parents à l'enquête, l'utilisation d'équipements lourds était le point d'entrée qui l'a mené à une spirale de santé mentale, puis à l'isolement, puis aux trucs plus durs. Le pro de physique classique avait tout ce qu'il fallait. Il a fait la scène du Mister Olympia. Il portait un conditionnement que la plupart des mecs ne peuvent pas feindre, même avec un filtre. Et puis, il a juste disparu de sa propre vie. En septembre 2023, le pro basé à Sheffield a été trouvé sans réaction dans son appartement. Il avait 34 ans. L'enquête n'a pas commencé jusqu'en avril 2024. Et quand elle l'a fait, le coroner a présenté le tableau complet. La cause du décès était un mélange de méthamphétamine et de cocaïne. Son corps montrait également des signes d'utilisation prolongée de stéroïdes. La combinaison a peint une image que la scène du culturisme ne voulait pas regarder directement. Ses parents ont fait la chose la plus courageuse que les parents peuvent faire après quelque chose comme ça. Ils ont parlé publiquement. Ils ont publiquement blâmé les stéroïdes pour la façon dont l'esprit de leur fils a commencé à se fissurer. Pas d'une manière, les drogues sont mauvaises, PSA. Ils ont expliqué comment l'équipement l'a amené à se retirer, l'a rendu paranoïaque, l'a fait cesser de répondre aux appels. Ils ont regardé la meth et la coke arriver après ça comme un moyen pour lui de faire face à ce que les cycles lui faisaient. C'était de l'automédication sur de l'automédication. La communauté du culturisme britannique a pris la nouvelle durement. Génération Iron et Fitness Vault ont tous deux fait des hommages. Les forums de salles de sport britanniques se sont illuminés avec des mecs qui s'étaient entraînés avec le concurrent Olympia, disant qu'ils dérivaient depuis des mois. Personne ne savait comment intervenir. Personne ne savait si intervenir aboutirait même. Le mec était un athlète de niveau Mr Olympia. Tu ne te contentes pas de marcher jusqu'à ce gars et de lui dire de prendre du repos sur le cycle. Il n'a jamais refait la scène. Il n'a jamais atteint 35 ans. L'appartement de Sheffield où ils l'ont trouvé était très loin des projecteurs de l'Olympia. Et ses parents font toujours ce que l'IFBB ne fera jamais, ce qui est de pointer du doigt vers le véritable coupable. Si la mort de Neil était la honte tranquille du culturisme, cette affaire suivante était une bombe 2025 que la communauté du fitness essaie toujours de traiter. Hayley McNaff. L'histoire de drogue du pro du Massachusetts n'est devenue publique qu'après qu'elle soit partie. La championne concourante opérait à la vue de tous. Elle était déjà un nom célèbre au milieu des années 2000. Présentée dans le documentaire 2005, Raising the Bar, qui a suivi des concurrentes féminines tentant de percer dans l'industrie. Elle était le genre d'athlète que d'autres femmes admiraient. Physique champion, fitness, statut d'influenceuse, tout le paquet. De l'extérieur, la femme prospérait. Du rapport de toxicologie, elle avait fait bien plus que simplement soulever des poids. Le 8 août 2025, le pro basé à Sudbury a été trouvé mort à l'intérieur de sa maison. Elle avait 37 ans. Sa famille a publié un avis de décès qu'il appelait inattendu mais paisible. C'est le type de langage que les familles utilisent quand elles veulent donner de l'intimité à une personne chère. Les autorités du Massachusetts avaient d'autres plans, cependant. L'autopsie complète a été publiée en novembre 2025. Le rapport de toxicologie ressemblait à un vol dans une pharmacie. Intoxication aiguë à l'héroïne, au fentanyl, au 4-NP, à la cocaïne et à la norbuprenorphine. Pour les gens qui ne parlent pas la chimie, c'est une pile d'opioïdes et de stimulants dans leur système en même temps. Le 4-NP est un précurseur du fentanyl. La norbuprenorphine est ce qui sort de la buprenorphine que les gens utilisent pour se sevrer des opioïdes. Donc, elle essayait soit de se sevrer de quelque chose, soit que quelqu'un ait mélangé ses affaires. De toute façon, overdose accidentelle. Certificat de décès signé. La communauté du fitness a explosé. Generation Iron a publié un article d'hommage. Le Daily Mail l'a repris, a publié l'avis de décès. Les pages Instagram et Facebook du fitness ont été inondées de réactions de personnes qui s'étaient entraînées avec elle, avaient participé contre elle, ou admiraient simplement son travail de loin. Personne ne voulait croire qu'une femme qui avait été à l'écran dans un documentaire sur la compétition il y a 20 ans puisse finir comme ça. Ce que personne ne dit à haute voix, c'est que les femmes culturistes ne reçoivent presque jamais ce niveau d'attention en cas d'overdose. Les conversations sur la dépendance dans le sport concernent généralement les hommes. Sa mort force une conversation que l'industrie a esquivée pour toujours. Alors que celui-ci était soudain et choquant, ce pro suivant a passé des années à admettre ouvertement que la dépendance dirigeait le spectacle jusqu'à ce qu'elle le rattrape. Doug F. Scher, la drogue a commencé plutôt jeune pour moi. Le pro IFBB était franc avec son histoire avant de mourir. Il a dit au podcast Mark Bell Power Project en 2023 qu'il avait été un toxicomane à la méthamphétamine cristalline avant que le culturisme ne le sorte. Il a encadré le levage comme la chose qui lui avait littéralement sauvé la vie. Il se nettoyait de la meth en s'entraînant chaque jour, en redirigeant toute cette énergie addictive en répétition. Sur le papier, cela semble une histoire de retour, le type d'arc de rédemption que le sport aime brandir lors d'exposés. Mais l'homme lui-même a lâché la ligne qui a retourné tout le récit. Il a admis qu'il avait simplement échangé une dépendance contre une autre. L'entraînement, les PED, les stéroïdes, le coup de dopamine de la progression. Il a littéralement dit qu'il prospérait en étant accro. Pas vaguement. Il a utilisé exactement ce cadrage. Le mec savait que son cerveau avait besoin d'une dose, et la salle de sport était juste un revendeur plus socialement acceptable. Soft White Underbelly a également fait une interview avec lui, où il a parcouru tout l'arc du toxicomane à la méthamphétamine au pro bodybuilder. Plusieurs cycles, plusieurs retours, plusieurs aveux. Il avait le type d'autoconscience qu'on obtient rarement des gars encore dans le sport. Il savait exactement ce qu'il était. Il n'arrivait simplement pas à entièrement abandonner la partie chimique. En juin 2024, le pro a été trouvé mort à environ 36 ans. Les rapports provenant des forums de culturisme et de la communauté Soft White Underbelly pointed to an apparent overdose involving cocaine, methamphetamine and fentanyl. The same three-letter cocktail that has been wiping out half the country was the same cocktail that came back for him. The redemption arc he had built in public ended in private. The bodybuilding scene took it especially hard because he had been transparent. He wasn't hiding behind a natural claim. He wasn't selling fake supplement stacks on Instagram. He was telling people the truth. Bodybuilding helped him. Bodybuilding also kept him in a chemical loop. He never fully escaped. Fitness Vault ran his obituary. Reddit's bodybuilding sub had a long morning thread that was equal parts grief, and we all kind of saw this coming. His whole legacy is showing everybody what addiction transfer looks like. You don't beat it, you just move it around. That story ended in tragedy, but this next Eve Baby Pro hit rock bottom 4 times before finally figuring out how to keep his life and his career. Antoine Vion, the Canadian pro, got his card and then watched everything he just earned slide into the toilet. The men's open competitor turned pro and almost immediately spiraled into a drug and alcohol addiction that wrecked his entire structure. We're not talking a casual party phase, we're talking homelessness, bottoming out, losing everything, scraping his way back up, then losing everything again on repeat. The man has been very open about the rehabs, 4 total. The first 3 ended in relapse. That's the part most pros don't talk about. They love the comeback arc. Nobody wants to admit the comeback usually fails the first 3 times. He actually said it on the Generation Iron podcast and on Become Next Level. He gave the timeline straight. He gave the rock bottom straight. The dude was sleeping in places he didn't want to name on camera. Around 2017 to 2018, he finally got sober. He flipped the script and started using bodybuilding as the structure that held him together, not in the toxic Doug Fucci way where the addiction just transferred. He talks about it more like a focus tool. Wake up, hit the gym, hit the meal plan, repeat. The discipline of bodybuilding kept his brain occupied long enough for the cravings to settle. By 2020, the Canadian pro made it to the Mr. Olympia stage and finished 14th in the men's open. For context, just qualifying for that show is a flex. Doing it after almost dying 4 times is unreal. He's now married, has a child, and still talks publicly about staying in recovery. He's been posting milestones, 4 years clean, 5 years clean, all of it. His Instagram handle Antoine Vorstagen has become an unofficial recovery hub for guys in the sport who don't know how to ask for help. The wild part is he's one of the few pros who openly says you can't outtrain this. The training won't fix it. It will just hold you over until you actually deal with the stuff underneath. That message lands differently coming from a guy who almost lost the whole thing. From a Canadian Mr. Olympia comeback to a New York stage winner who quietly battled the same demons. This next IFBB pro hit his opiate addiction in plain sight while collecting trophies. Aaron Clark. The heavyweight champ's addiction looked like every other bodybuilder's pain management story until it didn't. The IFBB pro had been crushing the competition scene. He took the 2012 USA's heavyweight title and then went on to win the 2014 New York Pro outright. The dude was in the conversation, big back, full structure, the whole thing. From the outside, he was a guy on the rise. But behind all that, the New York Pro winner was running a 5-year opiate addiction the entire time. The way he tells it on the Real Recovery Talk podcast. It started the way it always does in this sport. Injuries, pain, prescriptions. The training schedule of a pro bodybuilder is brutal. Tendons get pushed past their limit. Joints start protesting. Something pops. You go to a doctor. The doctor writes a script. And the script writes the rest of your life if you're not paying attention. The pro also dipped into kratom and a few other things while he was in the loop. Is that legal in most states? Leaf that hits the same opiate receptors as the prescription stuff, but without the prescription. Half the gym bro community uses it like coffee. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was self-medicating with the prescriptions to manage his dependence on scripts. That's how deep it got. He moved states during the worst of it, which is something a lot of addicts in this sport do. New gym, new circle, new chance to pretend you're starting over. He told the RX Muscle and Real Recovery Talk crews that what finally got him clean was an ultimatum. Somebody close to him drew a line. Either you fix this or we're done. He chose to fix it. The heavyweight pro now uses his Instagram, Aaron Clark by Bye Bye Pro, to share his recovery openly. He talks about the 5-year battle, the daily grind of staying clean, and the weird shame that comes with being a pro athlete who got addicted to pills. He's been showing up at events, doing podcasts, being honest. The sport doesn't have many of those guys. Most pros are still pretending opiates aren't a problem in the locker room. The pain pill spiral matches a pattern that's repeated across the entire sport. But this next IFBB pro had a shoulder injury so bad it cost him a sponsor before it almost cost him his life. Coach Andetka. Big Lau's addiction started with a single shoulder injury. The Lao American IFBB pro had been bodybuilding since age 11, which is unhinged in itself. He won early NPC titles. He was on the path to the pro stage. Then, right before a major qualifier, his shoulder went. The doctors did what doctors do. They wrote him a painkiller script to keep him moving. The opioids did their job. They killed the pain. They also killed everything else. The young pro slid into a full-on opioid addiction that brought depression, anxiety, and alcoholism along for the ride. The man, who had been in the gym since he was a literal child, was now waking up shaking. He lost a major sponsorship over the spiral. The bodybuilding industry has a short memory for guys who can't show up to events looking ready. What separates this story is the comeback. He went through multiple rehabs, meetings, and therapy. He didn't just shake the addiction. He rebuilt the whole identity from the ground up. By the time he got into his 40s, he was sober and competing again. He took the 2014 NPC Nationals overall title and earned his pro card late in the game. Then he went and finished 7th at the 2016 Mr. Olympia, top 10 in the world after being a full-blown addict. He documented the whole thing too. There's a film called Fallen Star, a rising sun that follows his arc, and he wrote an autobiography called I Am Fu de Faune. He uses his real Lao name in the book on purpose. The Color of Success podcast had him on for a deep dive about the recovery, the AA process, and how he rewired his brain after years of opioids. Big Lao's whole point is that the sports culture around pain is broken. Everyone gets hurt. Almost nobody gets clean help. The default move is tough it out and grab a script. He's now part of the small crew of pros openly telling young lifters that there's another option. Recovery and a top 10 Olympia finish in the same lifetime is a flex. That redemption hit different because he came back from the bottom. This next IFBB pro started even lower with prison time and drug dealing on his record before he ever touched a barbell. Nate Spears, the IFBB pro, was already doing a different kind of cycle before bodybuilding ever entered the picture. He grew up partying hard, using heavy drugs, selling drugs, and getting arrested. The dude has done jail time, he has done prison time. The bio reads like the antagonist in an early 2000s crime drama, not a pro bodybuilder cover story. The man has talked about the early years on RX Muscle. The drug game wasn't a side hustle. It was the whole life. He was buying, selling, using, getting locked up, getting out, doing it again. The stretch he described sounds like the kind of pattern that ends in a coffin or a long prison number. Not on a bodybuilding stage with a pro card, but somewhere in the loop he picked up a barbell. The training did the thing it tends to do for guys with addiction wiring. It gave him a place to put the chaos. He started taking it serious, then more serious. Then he was at the NPC Nationals competing for a pro card against guys who had clean records, college coaching, and full sponsorships. Somehow he came out of that with the pro card in his hand. Against the Odds doesn't even cover it. The former dealer now uses his story to talk to younger guys getting out of the same cycle he was in. The RX Muscle interviews go deep on the prison time, the rehab work, and the rebuild. He's an inspirational speaker and coach. Now, the Reddit R bodybuilding crew shares his story regularly as a kind of if this dude can flip it, anybody can post. Where the story matters is that it breaks the typical pro bodybuilder pipeline. Most guys in the IFBB came up through teen physique, junior nationals, college lifting, and clean coaching. He came up through holding cells. The fact that he's even on the same stage as those guys is the entire point. Bodybuilding is one of the very few sports where a guy with a real rap sheet and a real addiction history can still build a legit professional career as long as he can put on the muscle and dial in the conditioning. He flipped his life from a jail cell to a pro card. This next pro made the same flip from a crack pipe to a gym ownership empire that nobody saw coming. Felicia Lee Sexton, agitator, I'm addicted to anything that makes me feel good. And so by the time I was 20 years old, I was snorting cocaine on a regular basis. And GT, the Houston pro's old life was deep in the streets. Before the trophies, before the gym, before the wellness gigs, she was running a crack cocaine addiction and dealing on top of it. She wasn't a casual user. She was in the game, buying, selling, using the whole Houston, Texas underbelly. The kind of life that doesn't usually pivot into a pro bodybuilding career in a published memoir. The retired pro got sober and then absolutely flipped the script. She got into bodybuilding and powerlifting and started racking up award-winning titles. She didn't just compete, she got serious about it. Then she opened her own gym, then she became the wellness manager at Legacy Community Health in Houston. Then she dropped a book in 2018 called From Recovery to Discovery, My Journey Through Addiction. Most people get sober and just try not to relapse. She got sober and built a whole second career that uses fitness as a recovery tool. The Houston native has more than 20 years clean at this point. That's a long time to stay locked in. She has a tattoo that lists every body part she rebuilt during her recovery, which is one of the more fire ways to memorialize the journey. Houston Public Media did a profile on her where she walked through the whole arc. The Houston Chronicle picked it up, ran features. Local recovery groups still bring her in to speak. Her whole gimmick is using fitness and bodybuilding as a structure for women coming out of addiction. She runs programs through her gym and through Legacy that help women rebuild physically while they rebuild mentally. The lift gives them confidence, the schedule gives them structure, the community gives them accountability. The same three things that pulled her out of the crack life are the things she's now handing to the next round of women. She's a rare example of a pro bodybuilder using the addiction story as a public mission, not a one-time podcast confession. She didn't just survive crack and turn into a gym girl. She built an entire empire on the lessons. That transformation took decades. This next IFBB pro pulled the same kind of flip later in life and turned a midlife reset into a championship. Alex Woodson. The IFBB pro was already past 40 when he decided to flip his entire life. Most guys at that age are easing into dad bod territory and arguing about which streaming service to cancel. He was coming out of an addiction battle that had eaten a chunk of his adult life. The exact substances aren't fully spelled out in his interviews, though he's hinted at issues with cocaine and meth when discussing the rougher chapters on the This Pink Cloud podcast. The thing about the story is the timing. The pro didn't get into bodybuilding as a teenager looking for an identity. He got into it as a grown adult trying to outrun what was killing him. He talks about the moment he realized the gym was the only place where his brain finally went quiet. No cravings, no spiraling, just reps. So, he made the gym his whole life. The grind he put in is unhinged for the age bracket. He went from being an addict to becoming an IFBB Pro champion. That's not a hobby pivot. That's a full reinvention. The IFBB Pro card is something most guys chase from their teens. The dude picked it up after spending years getting clean. The training plan, the meal prep, the conditioning work, all of it on a body that had already been through the chemical ringer. He's done long-form interviews on the This Pink Cloud podcast where he goes deep into the addict to champion arc. The conversations cover the cravings, the fitness habits that replace them, and the way the bodybuilding lifestyle pretty much demands the kind of obsessive discipline that addicts already have. The host basically calls it productive obsession. Take the same brain wiring that made you score, point it at squats and chicken breasts, and you become a different person. His whole message is that it's never too late. The fitness Instagram and Facebook crowds love sharing his clips for that reason. The pro is the proof that being on the wrong side of 40, the wrong side of an addiction, and the wrong side of public opinion doesn't lock you out of building something. The gym took him in when nothing else would. The pro card was just a receipt. That flip happened on a podcast coach. This next IFBB pro found her exit through faith, sobriety, and a whole new relationship with the bar. Elizabeth Molen. The IFBB pro got sober in 2014 after years of addiction and emptiness. She doesn't dress it up, she talks about the chase, the substances, and the feeling of having nothing inside that works. The kind of low that makes you start looking for anything that might fill it. She found her way out through CrossFit first, then Olympic weightlifting. Then the bodybuilding world picked her up. The transition wasn't a clean upward arc. CrossFit gave her structure. Olympic weightlifting gave her power. Bodybuilding gave her a mirror. By the time she made it to the pro level, she'd already rewired her relationship with discipline. She talks about the bar like it's a tool that helped her get sober, not just a tool that built her physique. The training itself was the therapy. The pro has been very public about her faith in Christ being the foundation under all of it. She uses the phrase God-sized hole to describe the emptiness that drugs were trying to plug. Sobriety alone wasn't enough. CrossFit alone wasn't enough. Bodybuilding alone wasn't enough. The way she explains it on the Campfire Council podcast, it took the faith piece to lock everything else into place. Discipline, faith, training, recovery, all stacked. Turning pro wasn't the cherry on top. It was a checkpoint. She's been pretty clear that the mental battles didn't disappear when she got the card. Pro bodybuilding doesn't fix anything by itself. The cutting cycles, the prep stress, the diet psychosis, all of it can drag a person back into addiction territory if they don't have the rest of the framework. She talks about the prep weeks like they are spiritual stress tests. Stay locked in or risk slipping. Her Instagram is full of reflections on the mental toll of bodybuilding, which is almost unheard of from female pros. Most of the female content space in the sport is pose pics and supplement plugs. The pro post about the dark side, the cravings that don't fully go away, the discipline that has to be daily, the way one bad week of prep can put a recovering addict in a real spot. She found her way out through faith and discipline. This last guy on the list found his way to the bottom of an induced coma after running a steroid cycle so extreme it almost ended him forever. Zach Wilkinson. The 32-year-old UK scaffolder's addiction was all gear, no recreational. The competitive bodybuilder spent over 2 years burning through 35,000 euros, around 46,000 steroids alone. We're talking Anavar, Masteron, and Equipwise stacked together. He was injecting 3 times a day. For people who don't know the lingo, that is medical-grade insanity. Most enhanced lifter cycle for a few weeks, the dude was stacking like he was prepping for a war. The diet was just as unhinged. He was weighing his syrups and his salt to the gram for precision. Every macro accounted for, every micro tracked, the kind of obsessive control that crosses the line from dedicated to disturbed really fast. He was treating his body like a chemistry experiment with a deadline. The deadline was a competition. The body just couldn't keep up. In March 2025, the lifter's body finally said enough. He started having seizures, he started vomiting non-stop. The hospital had to put him in an induced coma for 7 straight days. 7 days. The doctors diagnosed him with what they officially called likely provoked seizures in the context of multiple drugs. Translation: the cocktail he was pumping into himself caused his brain to short-circuit. When he woke up, he had to learn how to walk again. The induced coma, plus the seizures, had wrecked his motor function. The same legs that had been hitting compound lifts were now struggling to hold him upright. The bodybuilding career was done, not paused, done. The scaffolder quit the sport entirely. He's been speaking publicly through outlets like El Bible, the New York Post, and the Mirror, warning younger lifters about the gear hole he fell into. The Onward Shift podcast also had him on for a longer breakdown. He's not preaching like a converted saint. He's talking like a guy who almost died because he believed every dosing protocol he saw on a forum. His full message is the kind of thing the bodybuilding industry has avoided forever. The line between pushing limits and ending up on a venti